Thank you all for coming. The bot is recording this bad boy. So as always, feel free to share, if you have any questions or have anything you want to know as the conversation is going on, drop it in the chat, but also feel free to send it in general. Like you could also come up on stage if you'd like and chat, and discuss, see what you got, see what's going on. If you're listening to this as well later on, then feel free to take that question and put it in general again, and we'll just keep the discussion flowing. So, we've been doing every other week having a bit of a casual talk about different pieces of the Morpheus ecosystem that are being developed. And we've gone quite thoroughly actually through all these different components and these different participants in the ecosystem. Today, we're going to circle back to capital providers. Capital providers, anybody who's staking some ETH and getting more token as a reward. And that capital that they're providing is then being used by the protocol to, generate protocol owned liquidity, but also to handle the liquidity pool. And there's some other stuff as well. So if you're not familiar, everybody here is probably familiar. Check into that. But today I want to get into MRC 45, which is a referral system. And it's quite nice to see. I think referrals are pretty common in a lot of projects now. It's a good way to align, if you're really forward looking on a project, you can also suggest it to your friends and people you think may also like it, and you get some kind of reward. What's going on, Kudo? So there is an incentive, there is, a reason to help spread the word because it also helps you out. And by everybody contributing, the whole ecosystem gets helped out. So we're going to talk about this MRC 45. But David, I want to just take a second to reflect a bit on, how you feel about what's been happening in capital providing altogether. We got some metrics to go over, which are really solid. Capital providers are still the biggest, basically, portion of unique contributors to Morpheus, as opposed to code providing, compute providing, and in the future will be builders. So yeah, how do you feel? Like, how's it been going with the POL? There's been a bunch of different protocol on liquidity events. Maybe we can just touch on like what is the whole mechanism happening with capital a little bit and discuss like how those metrics have been going.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump into that. So, and I've gotten to meet a ton of people in the community thanks to this trip to Singapore. So, I've been at Token 2049 all week. The Morpheus community held a decentralized AI summit on the 17th. Got to meet a ton of the builders and people in the community. So, it's been really awesome to see everybody in person. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to emphasize enough how much decentralized AI has become like the topic. Like we didn't have the only AI event. I think there's been literally 5 or 6 decentralized AI days, summits, open source AI summit. There was an AGI summit, right? And so there's a lot of energy around this idea right now. And so I was literally just coming from the base event. The Ethereum second layer was holding an event here, and one of the big subjects was decentralized AI because Coinbase has been releasing tools for payments for AI agents. And immediately, the Morpheus community started talking about using those tools that they're releasing for sessions to connect in AI agents to that. So yeah, it's really amazing to see, considering it was only 1 year ago that the first decentralized AI day happened, and now here we are, and it's become sort of the trend that's emerging across the ecosystem. So yeah, to sort of start with that, to see the energy in person, it's been really amazing. But yeah, to your point, there's been a ton of development done on the capital contracts the last few months. So most people here are probably already aware of people being able to stake their more rewards, right? And increase their proportionality of the more rewards by staking, their more into the future, right? And so they still get liquidity on their staked ETH, but they're able to basically signal to the community and the protocol that they're long term committed to Morpheus. So it's really encouraging. I think, you know, 10, 15, 20% of the capital providers have staked, but like 80% of the code contributors have staked their more rewards, which is hugely reduced the amount of more emissions in the near term. I think the code bucket's down to like 400, 500 more per day, which is a huge reduction from the 3,400 more today that was before the staking went live. So, sort of all of these things are increasing the scarcity of the more tokens. And obviously, there was a great response from the community and the market, sort of seeing staking go live. And there's a couple of things you talked about, new improvements coming down the line for the capital contracts that people have put into MRCs. I think it's MRC 45 and 46, to create additional mechanisms to reward people, especially the referral proposal, for bringing in additional stake ETH, right? Doing that educational role of explaining how the system works to people and then having an address that folks can add when they put in their stake ETH deposit to sort of give credit and give a shout out to somebody that did that education for them, right? And I really like the way the proposal is written. Is it's a win-win. Both the person using the referral address, right, that's making the stake ETH deposit gets a boost of 1% in their rewards, but so does the person that created that referral address, right? So it's sort of it's not subtractive; it's additive to both parties, right? So hopefully that'll really encourage people to spread the word about Morpheus, to explain and educate people about how unique this system is for staked ETH and contributing the yield. So just talking to people in the community and here in Singapore, there's been a ton of interest in that, and it's just at this point the proposal stage, but going through that process of discussing it openly with everybody, getting feedback, tweaking the proposal, then of course it would move towards getting coded and getting audited. So, but yeah, that just give everybody a high level update on what's been going on. It's I'm really really encouraged by all those improvements.
Very cool. Yeah, it's been nice to see the stats, and it's cool to hear what's going on in other parts of the world and all these conferences. Even in general chat, you shared this coalition, the DEAIS, the Decentralized AI Society. So there sounds like there really is a lot of cool things, and it's interesting that people are coming together around the topic instead of fighting and saying, "No, it's me, it's you, it's not us," but trying to find a lot of mind share to bring resources together for that.
Sure.
That's really awesome to hear.
100%. And, I think they just pronounce it DAIS, right? DAIS. So DAIS, Decentralized AI Society, is such a cool initiative, right? And it's by really OG players. We're talking like Michael Casey, right? Who is the chief editor for CoinDesk, right? Organized the consensus conference for years, wrote the book literally on the age of cryptocurrencies. I think that was back in like 2015, 2016, right? One of the earliest guys in crypto, and to seeing him lean in, right? And he's been in the Morpheus community since super early, right? He showed up at some of the earliest events. He got one of those red USB sticks and, was tweeting, we have to decentralize AI in January, right, of this year, right? And so now to see him making his full-time mission to build the decentralized AI society, the DAIS, I'm thinking about what they're doing as very similar to like an Ethereum enterprise alliance, right? It's that role that needs to happen of somebody like his level of credibility that can talk to protocols and companies and institutions and say, hey, you got to understand decentralized AI. And if you want to use it, we're going to help you, understand the tools, how to use the compute, how to access, all these coders and builders that are in the ecosystem. And the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance did a really great job of that over the years, and I think that's like a good model and sort of how I think of what Deus is doing. And so yeah, they held a dinner here in Singapore. They had like 60 people come out from the top protocol. You know, Filecoin is one of the founding members. The Morpheus community, you know, pitched in and became one of the founding members of Deus. So yeah, and they've helped out with a lot of the decentralized AI summits. Big shout out to Alexa. You know, she's one of the community members that's been organizing them. Like everybody thinks I'm organizing everything. Like, you know, I just show up and speak. The community is
Nice.
that is such an incredible job of like actually pulling everything together. You know, it's funny. I got my next kid on the way, and I'm not going to be able to go to permissionless. Like Mike Anderson from 6079 is throwing the decentralized AI day at permissionless, right? Like so, you know, I'm not even at half these events, and you know, people are just running with it, and that is so awesome to see that you know we need lots of advocates you know in the ecosystem. So yeah, no, I couldn't be more excited about what Michael Casey and James Haft and Alexa are doing with Deus. I think is really really cool.
That's good to hear, and it's really cool that Morpheus is the ethos about this community is let's work together, and where you can plug in and contribute a little bit, come in and contribute. And you know, particularly like last week, we spoke about builders and builder rewards and what's going to happen with that. And also, you know, a big part is let's say you're not in the code, you're not in building apps, and you are just you have some capital and you think it's something worth supporting, and you want to support it that way. That is, and also that was the very first thing that opened up was to be able to contribute to that. So it's cool that there is many different ways and different avenues to plug in, and for you, you get to go and speak, you get to share, and others too that aren't here, like you said. Not everybody is coming into the Discord, and they're still building this. They're helping to grow, this AI movement in crypto, which is really awesome. I do want to dive a little bit into capital providing. Currently, I'm on morestats.info, and there's a few different dashboards that the community has built. You guys can check out. And if I look at the amount of staked Ethereum right now, it's around 68,500 ETH, staked ETH. And with some simple math here, they've calculated the APY of staking is around 10%. So the amount of emissions you'll get and the price of those emissions is around 10%. Now, that's a pretty that's a pretty cool number. It seems like it also helps the protocol. But David, I wanted to take a second just to remind others and for myself too, like what is exactly happening with that capital, with that staked ETH in regard to the protocol. So if we're going to discuss like it's not just it's a good number and it helps out, but we can discuss a bit about like the protocol on liquidity events that have been happening that I think the community has been watching and we know what's going on, but actually discussing it in a bit up to date, it's around $3.7 million of protocol on liquidity. What exactly is that mechanism that when we're putting the staked ETH in, we're getting some more rewards, but how else is it really helping the ecosystem?
That's a really great question, and I think is worth repeating, right? 100%, 100% of the yield that is contributed goes into protocol and liquidity, right? Remember, Morpheus doesn't have a treasury. There's nobody getting paid. There's no foundation. There's no grants. 100% of the yield goes into protocol and liquidity. So that's the important thing to remember. How that happens is once a week, the smart contract transfers from the distribution contract into the receiving contract in Arbitrum that staked ETH, right? That has been collected throughout the week from all the yield contributed by capital providers, right? And it gets converted into Ethereum, and then it buys more tokens, MOR, out of the Uniswap pool, right? And once it's removed those more tokens from the Uniswap pool, it burns a part of them, it locks a part of them for the 16 years, right, for the second epoch. If you've studied the tail emissions, right, that's sort of a brilliant way to continue the rewards in Morpheus long term, right? So it burns part of them, it locks part of them for 16 years, right? And then the last portion is contributed as a liquidity position, as an LP position into the Uniswap pool, right? To add liquidity, to increase the liquidity of the Uniswap pool, right? And so that's what's been done with all of this capital, and that'll keep doing that, right? That the ETH is never going to get withdrawn and used for a treasury or something else. The whole purpose is for it to be protocol owned liquidity, right? And what that's doing is it's driving the organic demand for the more token, right? It's bootstrapping the network. So the more staked ETH that gets contributed, right? The more yield that gets contributed, the more organic demand there is for the token, right? The more tokens that get burned, the more tokens that get locked up, the more tokens that get added to liquidity position that is held by the protocol and liquidity, right? And one of the subjects that's come up recently is, Morpheus started on Ethereum and Arbitrum, but there's other good protocols that have been growing up, right? And I've been seeing the volumes of Base, for example, really explode the last 6 months. And now at this point, by different metrics like the number of users or the number of transactions or the trading volumes, it looks like Base has now surpassed Arbitrum, right? And Morpheus is fundamentally chain agnostic. So we should want to see Morpheus expand onto multiple chains, right? So that it's accessible to multiple communities. And you guys probably remember that Layer Zero was great enough to contribute an interoperability integration to the smart contract. So more tokens can be moved from Ethereum to Arbitrum to Base, to any of those chains. And so the proposal that's come up in the community is, hey, it would be great to diversify the protocol on liquidity, still for the exact same purpose, but into additional chains, right? And where should it go? Well, it should probably go to the deepest liquidity and the place where the most activity is happening, and that seems to be Base, right? And so, the proposal in the MRC is to slowly, over a period of weeks, transition some of the protocol and liquidity into Base, so that a new trading pair can get bootstrapped, right? And the big two dexes on Base are both Uniswap, but also Aerodrome seems to have a lot of the trading volume. So, thinking through the details of how to do that, you want to maintain a good amount of liquidity in trading pairs. We don't want 50 trading pairs, right? Because that would make the liquidity very shallow, right? And increase slippage. But it makes sense to have multiple, right? And so the first step in that journey is just to add a second, right? So whether it's onto Uniswap or Airdrome, to get a first trading pair of ETH and more onto Base seems like a logical next step. So I really like Morpheus in that it tends to be data driven, and so it's just really following the data, right? Morpheus again is chain agnostic, right? We shouldn't get too tribalistic about Arbitrum or Base or these things. These are all good communities, and if we can extend Morpheus to all of those big communities, then it's going to grow the Morpheus ecosystem. So that's one of the proposals out there right now that I think makes a lot of sense, and everybody seems to think, that there's some merit in moving that direction, but still thinking through the details and how to implement that. But I think that's something that looks like it will happen fairly soon.
Nice. It's a good reminder about that mechanism because it's just happening in the background, and it's good to just keep it a little fresh because that is basically the component that the capital providers are they are energizing this machine that does that. So for them, that's the things to focus on. Each of these different members in the community have different things to focus on and metrics and what they're kind of generating and moving, and that protocol and liquidity is definitely falls into that capital world. So with thank you for that, David. again, if anybody has any questions or anything comes up, you can feel free to drop it in the chat. If you're listening, also hit it up in general chat and we'll get to it later. Um, Particularly now that capital providing has been going on for a while, we got to see some of these metrics, and you mentioned like wanting to stay data driven. It's really good so we can see how it's performing and evaluate, the community evaluates like, is it worth getting some liquidity over on the base? Right now it's on Arbitrum. That conversation keeps on moving. But about you touched on a little of the details of the referral system, and I want to get into that, especially as it relates, like, if this MRC passes, how it relates to people who have already, let's say, contributed capital and staked it. So they can't be a referee, but they can refer someone else, for example. And then, there's these different tiers. And I dropped the link in general chat if anybody else wants to check on GitHub for MRC 45. There's these different tiers. So if you have staked 35 ETH, then you can get up to 2.5%. But anything below is 1%. Anything above up to 350 is 3.75, and 3,500 is 5%. So there's even consideration for size and what you get to refer. Um, I wanted you to, if you could maybe touch on that and touch on kind of the components of what it would be to refer if you're already existing capital provider or if you're coming in as a new capital provider.
Sure. And, just to give a bit of context, I think the community was inspired by looking at similar mechanisms that successful protocols like Lido have used, right? Lido had a what they called the share reward program, right? And if you helped bring in stake ETH, right, ETH that turned into stake ETH in their system, right, that powered more validators, they would share part of the protocol fees with people that did that. Um, but their system ended up sort of being almost run by a committee, and it was kind of bureaucratic, and you had to apply and you had to prove the stake thief and all these things. And so the Morpheus approach sort of boils that down but takes a bit of a simpler approach. There's no application, there's no committee. Like everything in Morpheus, it's permissionless, right? So the upside of that is it's going to be super easy for anybody to become create a referral address and teach people about this, and they can add that referral address in when they stake their stake ETH, right? When they deposit their stake ETH, right? And again, both people will benefit. Person, using the referral address will get a 1% boost in their proportionality, and so will the person that created the referral address. Now, the catch is it's permissionless and there are no applications and there is no committee. Obviously, some people are going to, deposit stake ETH and have created a referral address and list themselves, right? And that's the trade-off here, right? Is it's presumed in this game theory that people will do that. And there's effectively nothing you can do to stop them from doing that. Um, but also, I think that doesn't matter, right? If people stake to themselves and effectively everybody can do that, it sort of washes out, right? It doesn't. It has effectively a neutral effect on the system, whereas the real people will still get their benefit, right? And if people self stake or self refer, then it sort of has a neutral effect. So all in all, in order to avoid centralization, in order to avoid bureaucracy, and order avoid a huge amount of overhead, that Lido eventually just got rid of that program or had to change it a bunch of times, and they had all these problems where they couldn't successfully validate, or it took a lot of time and energy to validate the players. This simplification sort of avoids all that overhead, right? And so I think that's the right approach, and is much more in tune with the ethos that Morpheus is all about.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think it's been discussed in other chats as well. Like, we want to make games that are safe to play, and there's less gaming in a malicious way, and that if anybody can do the same thing of a game, then it becomes more fair, and to try to not take advantage of these components. So it's good that it's known that this could be a thing, but in the sake of decentralizing the process and not having one admin basically have to go through everything, that this is a component. And if it increases more staked ETH, then perhaps it is a component of game theory that works well for all the ecosystem. I actually had a little detail on that as you spoke. There is two things with capital providing. We can deposit staked ETH, ST and that is going to start getting us more tokens. Then we can also lock in our staked ETH. So we can stake our staked ETH. But this is, we're saying, I'm not going to remove this for a certain period of time. And because of that, we have a different proportionality. And this was discussed 2 AMAs ago. The proposal to, and also it applies for all the buckets for code providing, where you can stake it saying, I'm not in a rush to claim this. I want to delay the claim and
Stake your more tokens, you mean? Yeah,
take
yeah,
it
yeah.
in
You can
more
stake your
tokens.
more tokens. You still have liquidity of your staked ETH. Yeah, yeah.
Right. So does this how does that play in? I mean, it maybe it's insignificant, but what does that change if you're, let's say you're referring somebody and you do not stake your more tokens, or you're referring somebody and you do stake your more tokens? It's really it's irrelevant to the referral system, right?
Well, that's a really great question. It is relevant in the sense that the person doing the referral address is going to get more weight in the system, if you will, if the person that they refer, one, stakes more STEs, but also if they choose to do the power factor, right? If they choose to lock up their more rewards, it's going to increase their proportionality. So somebody doing the referral could want the depositor to stake as much stake ETH as they can and hold it as long as they hold those more rewards as long as they can, because that's going to maximize their proportionality, their weight in the system, their power factor, right? And so the referrer, should want to encourage long-term contributors, basically, right? They should want people that aren't just there to, do a little arbitrage or, keep it in for a little while, but keep it in for a long term, right? To attract people that are bullish on Ethereum and want to hold it anyway, so they might as well stake it towards Morpheus and support the development of decentralized AI. So it aligns the referral people towards long-term participants, because as long as that deposit of stake ETH stays in, they continue earning more rewards, right? The moment that the person withdraws their stake ETH, there's no more rewards accruing for the referrer, right? And so the game theory is they want people to stay in the game. They want people to stay, deposited with their staked ETH, and that's really cool because it aligns towards that outcome. An earlier version of the proposal, you know, would have said, oh, it's based on, when the person claims they're more or whatever, but that would have driven the wrong game theory. That would have driven people to, want somebody to claim they're more, right, earlier than later so that they could get their reward. The new version of the proposal doesn't have anything to do with the claims. So there's no connection between the person that makes the deposit and the person that was the referral address, right? They're independent. They have their own ownership, totally atomic ownership of, their own more tokens, right? And because the referral person keeps earning as long as the stake ETH stays in there, they should want the long-term people, right, to be involved. But that's a really good question.
Yeah, that is good to bring up, that if the person who you refer is also staking their more claim, then they get a better proportionality, and so it's kind of cyclical in that way, that everybody is adding up more, basically locking it in for longer and then getting more benefit. I did want to So there's also a proposal for a 90-day delay on the more claims from capital providers, which is that separate from staking your more claims, like delaying the ability to, provide capital for a day and then leave. And what is the rationale that's being discussed behind delaying that claim?
So that is really being driven by the on-chain analysis. Like you said, we're getting great sort of on-chain analysis at this point, and credit to Anton and others that have done that on-chain analysis. But I'll boil it down to this: 6,000 plus people have deposited stake deep. 4,000 of them have claimed more only once, right? Then there's a few thousand people that have claimed more a couple times. And then there's only about 400 people who have claimed on a regular basis, say like, once a month or something like that. And there's only about 120 people that have claimed once a week. And there's only 27 addresses, 27 out of 6,000 that are constantly claiming rewards and selling on the market, right? And so clearly what's happening, if you look at that data and you think about it, oh, they're contributing stake deep, they're earning their more, they're claiming their rewards, they're selling it on the market, right? It's a tiny number of addresses, 27 out of 6,000, right? And if you think about it from a game theory perspective, it's arbitrage, right? They're putting in stake deep, they're immediately in the current system, they're immediately getting the more, and they're selling it for a higher Ethereum price than the value of the yield they contributed, right? And so, yeah, they're contributing a little bit to the protocol owned liquidity, but not enough to earn what they're really earning out of this, right? And so, separate from the more staking and the power factor, it's clear that this is sort of like a negative feedback loop in the tokenomics right now, where the price of more goes up and this arbitrage opens up, and these folks that want to play that arbitrage flow in. They're motivated to stake deep, and they grab those tokens and they sell them on the market, right? And that naturally drives down the price of more, right? And the price of more goes down, the arbitrage kind of goes away a little bit, right? And it's not as bad, but each time the price goes up, it sort of suffers from this arbitrage. And so to avoid this type of game that people are playing, is you want to at least align people for 90 days, right? And if you look at it, 90% of capital contributors are put, not claiming more often than once a month, right? So the vast majority of people that are doing capital contributions, Morpheus, are these long-term contributors, right? There's those 27 addresses that are constantly claiming and dumping, right? That's a really, really tiny number, right? And they're not aligned with the interests of the protocol, right? So I think it's the proposal is 90 days. So you still again have liquidity of your stake ETH. You make a deposit, you can still withdraw it when you want, but to claim the more tokens, you got to wait 90 days. And we know from the bootstrapping period, there's plenty of people willing to do that, right? We have the data from the bootstrapping period, which was 90 days, that people are willing to wait that long. And we can see on the on-chain data, in the 90 days after the bootstrapping period, most people, are doing an occasional claim of more, once a month, every few months, but they're not constantly claiming, right? And so it seems like a really basic thing to close that negative arbitrage loop and require 90 days. And then the second piece is okay, 90 days after I deposit, but that would still leave open a game where they deposit and then they have to wait 90 days, but then they could constantly claim after that. So it's 90 days from the time the stake deep deposited and 90 days from your last claim, right? So somebody can't play that game of getting value in the system and then arbitraging after. So by requiring 90 days from deposit and 90 days from your last claim, it sort of closes that loop and it firmly roots the network in people that are long-term aligned, right? And if there's an arbitrage, people are still going to arbitrage, but at least they're taking 90 days of price risk, which most of the arbitrageurs probably won't take, right? Because the prices will go up and down. There'll be too many factors that they won't be able to control, and they'll go look for some other arbitrage, right? So you can't get rid of arbitrage entirely, but I think it's a reasonable basic bar to say, okay, you know, we can see the vast majority of people are, supporting the long term of Morpheus. There's these tiny number of addresses that are playing this arbitrage game. Let's close that negative feedback loop. That way, the more token can appreciate, and people don't automatically, come in and do this arbitrage, right? That'll be better for the economics of the system over time.
Nice explanation, and it's good to just reiterate that it's not the staked ETH that is locked; it is the claiming of the reward. So you're always welcome to come in and out with the ETH, but it's that reward which is saying, "I want to be a part of Morpheus." That is what is being delayed and adding some time delay to kind of focus in on this specific kind of player who's been in the pool. And it's cool that this is coming from a place of analysis, and like having those numbers is really cool to listen to. It wasn't just arbitrary, you know what, we need to have, there has to be some way to slow this down, that you could even fine tune it into 27 wallets. And I think it's nice, there may definitely be some reevaluating from the capital providers, like, okay, if this is part of it, I need to evaluate my strategy. To your point, the majority most likely will be like, that's fine. That was part of my strategy anyways. But from then on, it'll say, okay, if I am gonna get involved here, then I'm gonna have to have like a slower approach to claiming the Morpheus token, because now I can do it, every quarter, basically once every 3 months. So that would add in some component that whoever is participating as a capital provider has to kind of evaluate. Is it likely that this will happen for other types of contributors, for code contributors? I mean, we've also seen and talked about the metrics for that. The majority of the code contributors are staking for like 4 years or whatever. So is it something that if we see that it's successful, or that it aligns the community for the longer term, that it may also apply to other buckets?
That's a good question. Like you point out, I think it's 80% of the code contributors are staking. So it doesn't seem to be much of an issue on the code bucket, because the staking is so heavy that the staking periods are like 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. I think a quarter of the rewards are staked out past 6 years, which is an incredible statement, right? Of like the diamond handed nature of the code contributors, that they're willing to put out 6 years their rewards. That is just to me amazing, and sort of says a lot about the people that are involved and how long term they think about Morpheus. But so it doesn't seem like it's really needed on the code side, and the code is also has sort of other considerations around, you want to leave enough room for developers maybe that aren't as wealthy, to get some liquidity, so that you're able to not just support the diamond handed developers, but some developers that have more immediate needs, maybe are younger, maybe don't have a lot of wealth, and so there's some argument to be made there. Um, but continue to look at the on-chain data. If it would need to be implemented, you can look at it. But it seems like the main arbitrage, because the coding moves very slow, right? Somebody has to do the work and then contribute it, and then their weights have to get included. Like that moves over like months and months, right? Versus like capital, there's much more of an arbitrage opportunity because you can move so quickly in and out of the system. And that's a benefit, right? You want to maintain the attractiveness of Morpheus, that people keep their liquidity. I think that's one of the coolest things, is I can put in my ETH, and if I need to use it, I can withdraw it, right? But I think it's a reasonable requirement to say that the more rewards themselves, right, the more tokens that you're earning, 90 days is pretty reasonable. And if you look at most other protocols, like if you're, doing validators on Ethereum, right? There's a withdrawal period, right? Most protocols have some sort of withdrawal period on the rewards, and so I think it was sort of, I guess, natural and logical that Morpheus would end up developing something similar.
Good point about the different time scales of the different members, basically. And I hadn't really thought of it when I asked you that question. But someone in code and developer, they may have more immediate needs in the sense that what they are building took a while to make. And if they need to support themselves or support the computers they're running and their infrastructure, as opposed to the capital provider has a very quick entry, and it's the opposite. It's like quick entry but slower getting out of the system, and the person building a program is a slow entry, and so they may need a little smaller window, let's say, to have the protocol basically support them in that way. So that's a good point. I do want to ask, and we're gonna wind down. If you have any questions, like I said, feel free to share. Raise your hand if you want to come up. Um, I do want to ask, while we're on capital providing just a bit, is there any discussion of other kind of yield bearing assets? I know nowadays there's like 101, LSTs and like derivatives and staked ETH squared, and so it's kind of nuts how to decide. Right now it is with Lido ETH, and there is other projects like Rocket Pool ETH that have been around. These two are like some of the big guys, but there's also Coinbase has some of their own. Um, is there any discussion going on about like other ways that protocol that capital providers could stake, and that's been asked for a while too. Like that has been an ongoing discussion, but where is that at right now? Does it feel comfortable with Lido? Does it seem like there's room for other LSTs, or how do you feel about that other yield bearing assets?
It's a good question. Lido's been a good place to start. And part of the technical restriction is you really have to use something that has a rebase, right? Because if you think about it, if you a lot of these liquid staking tokens, they accrue value to the same token, as opposed to give you a little bit of extra token every day. And that's what I mean by a rebase reward, right? And
Hmm.
and the magic of Morpheus is you can separate the principal, right, the ETH that you're holding, from the yield, and you can authorize the contract and say, "Hey, send my yield over here," right? And that way you don't mix the two, right? The protocol never has access to your ETH because it's only authorized to use the yield. So you've got this bifurcation, right, between the principal and the yield. And you only get that from a rebasing token. If you look at the list, there's actually not that many rebasing tokens, right? There's a ton of liquid staking tokens, but there's not that many do the rebasing, right? And so you kind of narrows the field really quickly. And if you look at the market caps, they're not that big. Like outside of Lido, the other rebasing tokens are really a lot smaller, right? As far as like number of tokens that people have. And so, you know, some of the other conversation is like, okay, well, what about a whole different token? Well, if you look at the other yielding tokens, the second largest is Jitso Sol, right? There's, 50, $60 billion of staked Solana, right? So that's the second largest after Ethereum. But after that, it really falls off. I think after that, the third biggest is a couple of $1 billion, but it's 5 times, 10 times, 20 times less than Ethereum and Solana. So I think it would be great to get Solana added. One of the requirements for that is the distribution contract for Morpheus needs to be deployed on Solana, and so there needs to be a rough version of the code implemented to be deployed on Solana. And so, you know, that the lacking is not in the idea; it's in the execution. Right? You need a developer to volunteer and say, "Hey, I'll make that Rust version," right? And has the experience doing it. Right? It's not enough to say, "Oh, I know some Rust." You really want a developer built, deployed, tested, and successfully, done a bunch of Solana contracts. And there aren't a huge number of developers yet that have that experience. A lot of the Solana contracts have been built by the Solana Foundation. So a lot of developers tend to use their template, right? So here you need to extend a new contract in the Solana ecosystem. So I'm sure that'll get done. But for the immediate need, Ethereum's worked great as a starting point. It's proved really liquid, really easy to do, and so I would love to see that extended to more protocols because again, Morpheus is yield agnostic, is chain agnostic. Morpheus is for Solana people, and it's for Ethereum people, and it's for Cosmos people. And Near just got added. I saw on Warlord they've added, Aurora, which is the EVM chain for Near, and so that's really cool, right? So the contracts now work on basically Near via Aurora, but also Ace, Arbitrum, and Ethereum mainnet, right? So now it's on 4chain. So I'd love to see it on Cosmos and Solana next would be really cool. So yeah, just like step by step, right? Keep growing, keep expanding, keep improving the contracts. But just to give you like a technical understanding of the pieces that need to be in place in order to do that, right? So it really, since the beginning, people had all these great proposals about things that can be added, but then you have to think through, okay, it's got to be rebasing and it's got to be liquid enough, and the contracts have to work on that chain, right? So that's the thing that's going to work through.
Yeah, solid point there about rebasing, and we just hear the general term LST, liquid staking tokens, but that distinction of having the safety of the capital is there. It is the extra amount that's what's being touched, and so it sets a good distinction between the two. So thank you for that, and kudo multi-chain is on the way, brother. If you know any developers, if anybody knows anybody who is interested in these things and would like to build, that is the cool part about Morpheus. You just come here and build. Me, I'm good at hosting AMAs and stuff, and I don't build, so that's not how I participate. But everybody can find, and I encourage you to find your own way to plug in if you're really interested in these things. We do have somebody up, Jay Shaw. Got you up here. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but feel free to ask a question or share some of your thoughts.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, loud
Yep.
and clear.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I definitely agree with the multi-chain approach and kind of have a comment regarding the need for rebase tokens to get the yield from. So in this cycle, we have protocols like Pendle and Prism in Cosmos that split the principal from the yield. So you could like take the yield token from those platforms and get the yield, keep getting the yield from whatever asset. So that's like one way without rebase token.
Great. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Cosmos ecosystem. There's tons of great infrastructure built. I want to say Akash uses Cosmos, as well as I'm a big fan of Thorchain, and Thorchain has DEX fees and all sorts of interesting sources of yield as well. And so the other piece you would need is for the distribution contract to be deployed on Cosmos, so that it can interact and use the more tokens, but also provide the yield. Probably the last piece that you need is you also have to figure out the emission calculations, because you need to calculate the different yield types in the same unit of account. What I mean by that is if somebody contributes, Jitso Sol, well, that's worth a different amount of money than Ethereum is, right? And so what you need is, and Layer Zero, I believe, has this built into their messaging protocol, is you need an oracle for the price of ETH and the price of Jitso Sol, so that you can do the calculation and say, okay, well, if I convert them both into ETH terms, how much ETH yield was generated,
Yeah.
regardless of the yield type, right? And
Mhm.
then you have a common unit of account, and you can do that calculation. That's probably the other piece.
Yeah. I'm also following this project Prism in Cosmos. So they're like the Pendle in Cosmos. So they can split a token into the principal token and the yield token. And then they actually have an initiative to use the yield token to bootstrap other startups. So that's like kind of like how Morpheus started. Getting ST and gets bootstrapped from the yield from that. So they're kind of generalizing it. And I think you guys are generalizing as well on the Ethereum side. But basically, it's the same concept. With the yield token, the Y token, you can get the yield from from a asset without touching the principal. So that's just like another way, besides a rebase token.
Sweet. No, I appreciate that. Thanks for highlighting those, and I'll definitely check them out.
Yep.
And also, if you're on GitHub, feel free to make that comment there or in the capital provider chat. And if anybody knows other things like this, mechanisms and tools on Ethereum chain or on other chains that could potentially, help grow Morpheus, share it, let it be known, and see how, if people do have the capacity to code and integrate this, see how we could even test it in many ways too. So thank you for coming up. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Did anybody else have a question or a comment? Think I've asked all of my questions. David, did you have anything else you feel like you wanted to get to? It seems like everybody's pretty satisfied.
No, I mean, I think we've covered some great ground here, right? We talked about the reason and logic behind the 90-day delay, MRC. We talked about the referral rewards, right? And I think that'll create a lot of positive energy because it basically is a reward for education, right? It's a reward for helping people understand Morpheus and get involved, which is really cool. And sort of has a great track record with like the project that or the program that Lido used, and that helped drive a lot of stake use towards their project. So, and yeah, we talked about some of the tokenomics, reminded people how the protocol owned liquidity works, right, and constantly how that's driving more scarcity, right, because of the burn, because of the lock tokens, and because it stays in critical and liquidity and LP positions and Uniswap. And we also covered it getting expanded to base, which I think will be great because then you'll have more places than ever. It seems like there's a lot of energy there. Maybe the only thing we didn't cover is really cool milestone. The first protocol on liquidity to come from a More 20 project just happened. So I don't know if everybody caught this, but when Noun Space finished their bootstrapping period, 35 basis points, part of the staked ETH that their community provided to them, 35 basis points came back to the Morpheus protocol and liquidity. To the first More 20 project, right, Nounspace, that did a More 20 contract or a fair launch, just like Morpheus, part of that value is now flowing back to Morpheus to support more audits and more smart contracts by creating more demand in the protocol and liquidity. So we're starting to see the builders in the broader community that are using the smart contract Morpheus has built, start to contribute value back to the protocol, which is really cool to see. That's like the first, real world example that's happened, to show off sort of the value that More 20 and that whole standard, creates for the Morpheus community. So I just wanted to highlight that one, right? And that'll continue to build as more projects use the More 20 standard, because this idea, I think, of fair launch is so powerful, right? And is continuing to get adopted by others.
Yeah, shout out to Noun Space. That was really sweet watching that all come up and the whole discussion about it before, the interest in the contract and seeing them do their own thing. Good point to bring up. The only thing that we didn't bring up actually is the old classic when. Is this something, the referrals, that we feel like is soon? Is it kind of soon? Is it maybe still has a few things to iron out before it really goes live?
Let's break them down all three, right, real quick. The proposals, base is super easy because there's no code to do, right? You just have to, the more is already deployed on base. So all that has to happen is the smart contract has to transfer part of the protocol and liquidity to a Uniswap pool or an Aerodrome pair, and boom, there you go. Now you've got, liquidity or trading pair on base. So no coding required for that proposal. That's super easy, right? Hopefully, I hope to see that in the next week or so, maybe even sooner. Whenever the multi-sig and the smart contract protocol and liquidity stuff can get around to that, great, cool. The next one, the next easiest, is the 90 days. So if you've been following the MRC, I think the code is already on GitHub. I saw one of the audits came back today, and the audits are all good. So for the 90-day proposal, that's already coded. I believe Anton and others have it in the test net. So if you want to test it out, feel free to give it a try. But the logic is so simple. It's really just two simple functions. 90-day claim after deposit, 90-day claim after claim. Got it. 90-day lock after claim. So that logic is super simple. It's already passed the audits. It's already been coded. So the 90-day lock could deploy very quickly. So that maybe that's a week. I don't know, but it's fairly fast. The referral system is a little bit more complex and still needs to be coded up, and then would need to be audited. So that's probably the last of the three we'll see go into action. But seems to be well received by everybody and make a lot of sense. So it's just a matter of getting it coded up, properly and testing it out.
Very nice. Thank you for that. And thank you for always, being able to spend your time and discuss with us all the different things that are happening that, as you said earlier, you're not doing everything, but you're tapped into a lot of stuff. So it's cool to hear some of the things that aren't particularly talked about in general chat. Again, if you're listening to this, you can always drop a question in general chat and we'll follow up. Someone will follow up. You get some good answers. You're welcome to join the next one. We'll see what we discuss next. And yeah, thank you all for coming out. I think this was really good to clarify kind of what's been going up with the capital providers, give them a little bit of a touch, hit up a bunch of points. And in general, also, I shared the MRC link so you can read up on what's happening and what what is the current state of that discussion on GitHub. So check that out. And we'll see you next time. We're going to head on out. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for coming up too. And thanks for the question.
Thanks, Helios. Thanks, Anton. Thanks, guys. Catch you next time.